Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Tim Brooks with Worldwide Technology, and we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT's CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with a very accomplished CIO, Mr. Michael McCalmont. Hi, Mike.
Hey, good morning, Tim.
Given the merger of companies, the integration and the pace at which you have to move, and you've already identified that you've used partners to help you, that's for both velocity as well as the specialized skill sets that they bring?
Absolutely. Typically in organizations, as I mentioned, the growth curve doesn't begin until the separation occurs on either side. The selling company getting back to doing their everyday work, and the buying company, looking for, fulfilling their investment opportunity. And to do that, it does require agility and speed and change management, all of those things associated with running a large, significant initiative. And oftentimes, I think early on, anything that I have done that has been sizable has required augmentation of resources, and typically, not a standard blueprint, but typically where we would have gaps in the organization, we would backfill, with augmented resources, with folks who have done this before or who are experts in the technology that we were moving towards.
Okay. Hey, Mike, our audience is largely composed of chief data officers and data professionals. It is CDO Magazine. So what tips can you give us for data governance and collaboration between organizations that have different levels of what we call data maturity?
Yeah, great question. My experience on these, Tim, has been that as I highlighted, the most important upfront activity is to get these enterprises, separated, so that there's independence between the two organizations. The typical second step is, how do we end up getting the synergies from the organization, whether that's synergies associated with the commercial side of the organization, or synergies with the back office operations. And data plays a really critical role there. It to me is always a fast follow, but like any data project, the maturity of the information has to be understood before the information is merged, but getting it into one common place where it can be contextualized for external pieces of information like customers is critically important, while we actually have the fundamental operating information that helps the business leadership make the right decisions on how to run the business.
Yeah, great point. There's also the cultural difference sometimes in maturity between a company that is fully data driven, let's say, and the other extreme, let's say, still relies on tribal knowledge versus using data. Have you had to merge organizations that had those different sort of cultural perspectives on data?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's a case in point for what we went through the past year. One of the organizations that we brought in had a very, very mature footprint. It was world-class in terms of the type of information that they provided, their franchisees, as well as the internal components of the business. Whereas the other organization, we had very little. And so we were utilizing that footprint as the base design, but looking to upgrade what they had to a future state, but bringing along those learnings as we identified the data elements that had commonality within the parent business that we needed to merge with this best practice. So absolutely, I think it's a challenge that IT leaders and business leaders, quite frankly, face on a daily basis when they do these type of events.
When you look at a merger and acquisition event, let's call it, is that an opportunity to reframe, rewrite, or extend what I'd call the overall enterprise architecture and governance? Well, how does that fit into it? I mean, obviously, you've got to merge instances. You said HR, you've got the CRM systems, you've got ERPs. All of these are sort of concrete steps. But overarching some of that is, okay, how do we make technology decisions going forward? Is an M&A event an opportunity to revisit that or to tweak it?
No, it sure is. I think every M&A event is a chance to step back and reevaluate the architecture. Some of the best practices that I've seen here is look at functional space, highlight the applications that are in that space, and my experience has been upfront through the early stages of the planning effort to be able to draw those comparisons. Be able to determine, what is a likely long-term state. It doesn't mean that you have to get there in the next 6 months or a year, but declaring what the long-term state of that of that infrastructure or application is a critically important step. I'm a big fan of creating an end state and then building out future roadmaps in order to get there. Some things happen sooner. Other things can be delayed based upon priorities, but I think people want to know what that end state looks like. And I've always found, whether I'm on the buying side or the selling side, there's always learnings about the environment that we're either moving over or bringing in.
So from the perspective of sort of revisiting, business as usual, or what is our architecture and drivers, is sustainability playing a role now? I know 10 years ago, sustainability was rarely mentioned, particularly in the context of, we have a merger and acquisition event. Nowadays, though, we hear a lot about sustainability, and I know that we live with consequences of it that I've observed. Is that playing a role at all in M&A activities?
Oh, sure. I think it's in the vocabulary of a lot of the things that we end up doing, and I think also, Tim, there's also many definitions of sustainability. Sustainability can apply to thoughts around where we go from an environmental perspective, and the way that we treat the environment, and it also can talk about how we manage the technology in our systems on a long-term basis, with the supportability of those as well. So sustainability, I know, has multiple definitions that are an important element of ensuring that we're operating the tools most effectively, most efficiently, with the best support to the business.
So, Mike, I've got one final question. It's a little different, but I think that our audience will appreciate your perspective. If knowing what you know now, it's quite accomplished. You've had a wealth of different experiences. You've helped companies merge, extremely complex environments. You want to go back and talk to your 25-year-old self, and you want to ask the 25-year-old Michael McCalmont, what advice would you give that 25-year-old version of yourself?
Yeah, I would say a couple things here, Tim. One is, as you mentioned, just make sure you pay attention to the culture of the environments that you're merging. That's a critical part. You mentioned along the way, change management. I know many of us early in our careers, we're about the technology and we're about driving ahead, fast and furious, and oftentimes maybe missed that human element. And I think it's such an absolutely critical part of everything that we end up doing. And so I'd say that, to me, Tim, is some advice that I would give myself reflecting back. And I would also say, make sure that you surround yourself with a great team. Just 6 months ago, with a person who's now in a CIO role, and she reached out and said, Mike, I remember this very moment, and you supported me, and it gave me the confidence, to take these next steps. And now look where I'm at. And that to me, Tim, is why I come to work every single day. Is that if I can build a team and leave an organization or a legacy behind that sets them up for success, that's what I pride myself on. So those are the kind of lessons that I think back on.
Mike, that's great advice. And really, you've been great at sharing so much wonderful information with us today. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you, Mike McCalmont, for joining me today. I'm Tim Brooks with Worldwide Technology, and please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews in our CDO interview series. Thank you, Mike.
It's been my privilege, Tim.